Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. My name is Jason. I'm 30 years old and a software engineer. I didn't grow up with much, so everything I've achieved has been the result of hard work, long hours, and sheer determination. I started at a small tech company, working my way up from the bottom. It wasn't flashy, but I loved tackling complex problems, and it gave me the stability I had always craved. 3 years ago, just before getting married, I was able to buy a modest but comfortable home in a good neighborhood, something I was incredibly proud of. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of my independence, proof that I could build a solid future on my own terms. My career was going well. I had a steady income, benefits, and a growing savings account, the kind of security many people my age were still chasing. With my professional life on track, I decided it was time to focus on my personal life. That's when I met Ivy. We were introduced at a friend's party. She was a pediatric nurse at the local hospital, blonde, bright-eyed, with a smile that lit up the entire room. From the moment we spoke, there was an instant connection. We talked for hours, and I was drawn to her intelligence and passion for her work. She could explain complicated medical concepts in such a simple, engaging way that even someone like me, a tech guy, could fully understand and appreciate. She was driven, focused, and seemed to have her life together. She was everything I was looking for in a partner. We dated for a year. It was the kind of relationship people dream about, full of laughter, meaningful conversations, and shared goals. I felt like I had known her forever. When I proposed, she said yes through tears. We got married in her parents' church in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. I spent 2 months' salary on her engagement ring, a 2.1 carat platinum diamond. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of commitment, of the life I thought we were going to build together. But I had no idea that the life I was so carefully building was a fragile illusion. I didn't know the storm that was waiting for me. I couldn't imagine that everything I believed in was about to come crashing down. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you need to know about my family, specifically my younger brother, Mark, and my mother, Evelyn. Mark is 4 years younger than me. He's always been the golden boy, the charming, handsome, sociable one who could talk his way out of anything and into anything he wanted, especially with my mother. I was the quiet one, the bookworm, the kid who preferred computers and chess over sports and parties. Mark was the athlete. I was the nerd, a walking cliche. My mother, Evelyn, was an elementary school teacher before she retired early. She's always had a soft spot for Mark, too soft, if I'm honest. She called him her sensitive, artistic soul, even though his so-called artistic pursuits mostly involved avoiding responsibility and getting into harmless trouble. I was the brainy one, the hard worker, the one who stayed out of trouble. But no matter what I did, I never felt like I measured up to Mark in my mother's eyes. My father, Ryan, a retired mechanical engineer, was the opposite of her. Logical, methodical, and fair, he treated both of us equally, though I sensed he often struggled to understand Mark's behavior. He taught me practical life skills, how to change the oil in a car, fix a leaky faucet. He respected my work in tech, even if he didn't fully grasp what I did. He was my steady, silent support. Our family dynamic was especially apparent during holidays. I remember one Thanksgiving clearly. Mark showed up 2 hours late, without the dish he had promised to bring, but with a girl he had met the night before. My mother didn't scold him. Instead, she went out of her way to welcome both of them, while I had been helping in the kitchen for hours. My father, ever the quiet observer, just shook his head and discreetly poured me a bit more water, out of Mom's sight. After college, I immersed myself in my career. Mark, on the other hand, drifted from job to job. He'd last a few months before quitting, always with an excuse: a toxic boss, a stifling environment. His credit card debt became a recurring problem for our parents and, at times, for me. I had to bail him out of minor legal trouble twice. Once for driving with an expired license, and another time for trespassing at an ex-girlfriend's place. I spent nearly $3,000 covering those costs. He promised to pay me back when things got better. They never did. Despite my doubts and the strong reservations of my boss, Caleb, who met Mark at a company party and wasn't impressed I vouched for him. I helped him land a job in the sales department at my company. I assured Caleb I'd keep Mark in line. I genuinely believed that the base salary of $65,000 plus commissions, along with the structure of a reputable company, could finally give Mark the direction he needed. I spent weekends coaching and walking him through our products and the terminology. I told him this was his chance to turn things around. He acted grateful, said all the right things. Caleb gave me a skeptical look when he hired him, one of those "I hope you know what you're doing" looks. But I believed it would work. He was family, after all. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first year of marriage with Ivy seemed good. We settled into the house and made improvements we both loved. I invested about $8,000 of my savings into renovations, new hardwood floors in the living room, a master bathroom with a rain shower and heated floors, landscaping the backyard. Every cent added value to the house, but more importantly, it made it feel like our home, a place we were building together. We created routines: Sunday breakfasts, midweek date nights, occasional weekends at her parents' lake house. We hosted game nights, took cooking classes, did all the things happy couples are supposed to do, and we genuinely seemed happy. There was comfort and connection between us. We even began talking about starting a family in a year or two. Life appeared to be unfolding exactly as we had planned. Then, about a year into our marriage, I was assigned a major project rebuilding the payment system for a large hospital chain. The irony, considering what was about to unfold involving a hospital, is not lost on me. The project turned out to be far more demanding than I had anticipated. I started working long hours, often getting home after Ivy was already asleep. Weekends became just another extension of the work week. What was initially meant to be a 3-month assignment stretched into 6. I began missing our Sunday breakfasts, our date nights, everything that had once been routine. But I knew how important this project was for my career. Successfully delivering a system for a multi-million-dollar hospital chain would place me on the fast track to becoming a senior architect. It meant a better salary, stock options, and more control over the kinds of projects I'd take on. I explained all of this to Ivy, and she seemed to understand. In fact, she even brought me dinner at the office a few times in the beginning. It was during this period, when I was buried in work, that Ivy became close with Sophia, a traveling nurse from Seattle doing a 6-month rotation at her hospital. By Ivy's own description, Sophia was everything she wasn't: single, carefree, a bit wild. Suddenly, Ivy began going out for girls' nights with Sophia. She'd come home and tell me stories about bars and clubs I hadn't even known existed in our city. I was too focused on my project to notice how much things were shifting. Looking back, the cracks were already forming, but I either didn't notice or chose not to. I thought I was building our future, unaware that the present was quietly falling apart. Things really began to feel off around 4 months before everything unraveled just as the project was finally wrapping up. The system launched, and I was excited to return to normal life with Ivy. But somewhere along the way, what was normal for us had been redefined without me. Ivy's schedule grew erratic. She had always worked predictable 12-hour shifts, 3 days on, 4 days off. But now she was picking up extra shifts or spending more time with coworkers. When I asked, her explanations kept changing. The hospital was short-staffed. A friend needed her. Sometimes she mentioned someone named Amber. Other times, it was just a coworker going through a tough breakup. One evening, as part of my usual routine, I checked our bank statements and noticed a new pattern. Ivy had been withdrawing $200 in cash every week for the past 2 months. When I casually asked her about it, she brushed it off, saying she preferred having cash on hand for small purchases and outings with the girls. On the surface, it made sense, but it was completely out of character for her. She had never withdrawn that much cash before. I tried to reconnect. I suggested a weekend getaway to celebrate the successful launch of my project, but she said she couldn't get the time off. I offered to cook her favorite dinner, but she texted me at the last minute saying Sophia needed her urgently. A more suspicious person might have started putting the pieces together right then, but I was still operating from a place of trust. After all, 6 years of building enterprise systems had taught me not to jump to conclusions, to look for multiple data points before calling something a bug. I felt I needed more proof. Then came the issue with her phone. I began to notice her constantly texting with a faint smile on her face, but the moment I walked into the room, she'd flip the phone over or tuck it away. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd tell me it was just the workgroup chat. Her evasiveness was frustrating, but again, I told myself, everyone deserves their privacy. After I got Mark the job at my company, he started joining the office happy hours more frequently. Ivy began coming along too, saying she wanted to support both of us. There was one night in particular, at a bar styled like a vibrant cantina, that still haunts me. I got caught up talking with a client who showed up unexpectedly and was stuck on the other side of the place for about 45 minutes. When I finally managed to break away, I found Ivy and Mark tucked into a corner, deep in conversation, their heads nearly touching. They both flinched slightly when I approached. Mark quickly launched into a story about a contact at Ivy's hospital, saying they were discussing a potential sales opportunity. It sounded believable on the surface. What didn't sit right was the way Mark's hand lingered on Ivy's arm, or the way her cheeks were flushed, that same glow I remembered from the early days when we first started dating. Still, this was my brother and my wife. I pushed the doubts aside, chalked it up as a strange but isolated moment. It was too painful to consider any other possibility. Mark also began showing up at our house unannounced. He'd bring Ivy small gifts, her favorite coffee from a specialty cafe downtown, fancy chocolates, scented candles she liked. When I thanked him for the thoughtful gestures, he'd just smile and say, "Just taking care of my sister-in-law." At the time, I genuinely thought he was just being considerate, a sign that my efforts to help him settle into a more stable life were paying off, that he was finally becoming part of our family. I couldn't have been more wrong. At work, Mark started excelling in sales. To my surprise, he exceeded his quota 3 months in a row, hitting 115%. He began dressing better, seemed more driven. Secretly, I felt proud. I thought my guidance had made a difference. Some co-workers even congratulated me for helping turn him around, and I felt a misplaced sense of brotherly pride. Austin, a close colleague of mine, once made a passing comment with a curious smile that Mark seemed happier than ever, like someone who had just won the lottery or fallen deeply in love. I assumed he was talking about Mark's success at work, but now I understand exactly what that smile meant. About 2 months after Ivy's behavior began changing, she started getting sick in the mornings. I'd hear her in the bathroom around 6 a.m., always with the shower running. One morning, I got up to check on her. I held her hair back while she vomited and gently suggested that maybe she was pregnant. She panicked, visibly shaken, and insisted it was just a stomach virus going around the hospital. She immediately scheduled a doctor's appointment, but didn't want me to come with her, saying it was nothing serious. I was tracking her cycle on my calendar after all. We had been trying for a baby. She was 2 weeks late, something that had never happened before. Still, I didn't press the issue. I assumed she just wanted to be certain before sharing the news. Around that same time, Raphael, a friend of mine who works in hospital administration, not at Ivy's hospital, called me up to grab a drink. As we caught up, I mentioned Ivy's strange stomach issues. He raised an eyebrow, then said with a wink, "Morning sickness, bro." I laughed it off and told him Ivy denied, but he gave me a look. "Are you guys still trying?" Raphael asked. When I said yes, he just nodded and abruptly changed the subject. That night, he sent me a message. "Hey, I don't want to cause trouble, but how's Mark doing at your company?" I replied that Mark was doing well, hitting his sales targets, seemingly thriving. Raphael never elaborated on why he asked, but his question, along with what I'd seen at the bar and Ivy's increasingly strange behavior, planted a persistent seed of doubt in my mind. At the same time that my suspicions at home were growing, my mother, Evelyn, also began acting oddly. Instead of calling her home landline like she always had, she started calling Ivy directly on her cell. When I happened to be around during one of these calls, I'd hear Ivy saying things like, "Yes, I already have that prescription," or "I'll check on that offer." But the conversation seemed far too long to just be about prescriptions or basic errands. One day, I walked into the room while they were on speakerphone. As soon as Evelyn realized I was there, she quickly said, "Oh, Jason's home, we'll talk later," and hung up. My mother had always liked Ivy, but suddenly there was a new kind of closeness between them, one that excluded me. They went shopping together, shared inside jokes that I didn't understand. At one point, Evelyn even gave Ivy a family heirloom necklace that, since I was a child, had been promised to my future wife. When I told her I was surprised she had already given it to Ivy, her response was slightly curt. "Well, she's your wife now, isn't she?" Something in her tone felt off-guarded, almost defensive. Then came a visit from Aunt Carmen, my father's reserved but perceptive sister, who dropped by my parents' house about a week before everything unraveled. I stopped in to greet everyone. Ivy and Mark were also there. At one point, I noticed Carmen observing them as they stood in a quiet corner of the garden, laughing closely, their heads tilted together in a way that didn't look like typical in-law chatter. There was an uncomfortable intimacy to it. Carmen looked at me, then back at them, and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of her head. Later, I found out she told my father that something about their behavior didn't seem right. But my mother dismissed her concern immediately, saying, "Carmen always sees ghosts." Just another attempt to brush aside what I couldn't yet bring myself to confront. Around that same time, Austin, my colleague at work, brought up Mark again. He told me he'd seen him in the company parking lot one Saturday morning, dressed up like he was heading out on a date. Mark had looked startled when he noticed Austin. He also mentioned overhearing Mark on the phone recently, having an agitated conversation about needing money urgently, and that Evelyn would take care of it. All these fragments, scattered and seemingly unrelated, were starting to form a disturbing picture. I felt a growing pressure inside me, the need to know. My logical mind, the one trained to identify patterns, kept insisting that there were too many anomalies, too many unexplained behaviors. I reached a point where I could no longer pretend that everything was fine. I needed something definitive, clear evidence that would either confirm or dispel my fears. I knew that checking Ivy's emails would be a violation of trust, a step I never imagined taking. But given everything, it felt like the only path left to clarity. It had become a spiral of distrust I couldn't escape. The tension at home was almost tangible, at least to me. Ivy either didn't notice it or had simply become a better actress. I remember one particular afternoon when I came home earlier than expected. My car had broken down, and I returned by taxi. As I stepped through the front door, I heard voices coming from the living room, Ivy's laugh, light and carefree, and Mark's voice. They were chatting about something trivial, sharing an anecdote. I froze. Mark? He hadn't said he was coming over. I walked slowly toward the living room and saw them sitting on the couch, far too close. Ivy had a book open on her lap, and Mark held a cup of coffee. There was nothing overtly incriminating about the scene, but the way they shifted slightly apart the moment they saw me. The startled looks on their faces, especially Ivy's, set off alarms in my head. Jason, what are you doing here? Ivy asked with a smile that felt forced. My car broke down, I replied, my voice more tense than I intended. Mark stood awkwardly, spilling a bit of coffee. Yeah, I was just nearby, and thought I'd stop in to say hi. He mumbled, clearly uneasy. He lingered for a few more minutes, conversation strained, before quickly making up an excuse and leaving. Afterward, Ivy behaved as though nothing had happened. But that image, the closeness, the quick separation, the surprise lodged itself deep in my mind. Another piece added to the growing pile of unease. Not long after, Austin reached out to me again. This time he was more direct. He told me he'd seen Mark in the company parking lot several times at unusual hours, sometimes accompanied by a woman. He couldn't say for sure it was Ivy, but the description wasn't far off. More troubling was what Austin had overheard fragments of Mark's phone calls when he spoke about needing money, a serious problem that only one person could fix. And in those tense, whispered conversations, Ivy's name had come up in a context that had nothing to do with work. Austin was concerned. He knew Mark was my brother and didn't want to cause issues, but he felt I deserved to know. His words hit me like a brick. Suddenly, all the strange pieces, the hints, the changes in behavior, the awkward interactions began aligning into something undeniable. That night, the weight of anxiety became unbearable. I could no longer convince myself that I was imagining things. The lies, the secrecy, the subtle warnings from friends, Aunt Carmen's quiet observations, Austin's revelations, Ivy's sudden cash withdrawals, her erratic work schedule, her panic when I mentioned the possibility of pregnancy. I knew what I was about to do crossed a line of betrayal of the trust that should exist in a marriage, but I was past the point of second guessing. I needed the truth. I had to look where I knew the answers might be hidden. Ivy's email, accessed from the shared home computer. It wasn't really about the excuse I gave to check on a furniture delivery. That was just the surface. What I truly needed was clarity, no matter how painful. It was a Thursday afternoon. Ivy was at work. I told her I had to stay home to wait for an important work call, but in reality, my mind was far from any project. All I wanted was the truth. The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest. The air felt heavy, thick with a tension only I seemed to notice. I sat at the computer in our shared study, my heart pounding in my ears. For a moment, I hesitated. A part of me, the voice of my conscience, urged me to stop, to respect her privacy, to remember that trust is the cornerstone of any marriage. But another voice, louder and more insistent, born from months of doubts, fears, and ignored red flags, pushed me forward. I opened the browser and logged into Ivy's email. As the inbox loaded, my breath caught. There it was at the very top of her recent messages, a thread between Ivy and my mother, Evelyn. The subject line hit me like a punch to the gut. That Jason does not find out. The world seemed to stop. My stomach churned with a wave of nausea that eclipsed the morning sickness Ivy had faked. I stared at the words, frozen, horrified. That I don't find out about what? What secret could my wife and my own mother be hiding from me? My thoughts raced, pulling together every strange moment, every suspicious glance and convenient excuse. I already knew, deep down, that this was betrayal. The email subject just gave it a name, but I still had to know the full extent of it. Hands trembling, I clicked the thread. What I read felt like being bludgeoned repeatedly, every message a fresh blow. The emails went back 3 months, all centered around covering up Ivy's affair with Mark. At first, the messages were cautious. Evelyn asking Ivy if she was sure about what she was doing, warning her to be more discreet around me. But that caution didn't last. Soon, the tone turned cold, methodical, explicit, strategic. My own mother, the woman who raised me, was advising my wife on how to lie to me. She coached her on faking extra shifts at the hospital, offered excuses to use if I asked questions, even suggested using her own house as a place for Ivy and Mark to meet when my father wasn't around. One line burned itself into my brain. Ryan always plays 18 holes on Thursdays, so you'll have at least 4 hours. She had built a schedule around my father's absences to give them time together. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was logistical, clinical. My mother enabling my wife to cheat on me with my brother. And then came the worst part, the latest emails. Ivy was 2 months pregnant, confirmed by her doctor. And they didn't know whose child it was, mine or Mark's. The timeline of her encounters with both of us overlapped. One message had Ivy panicking after I mentioned that her morning sickness might be pregnancy-related. My mother's reply? Cold, cruel, calculating. She told Ivy to say it was mine, that I would be a better father than Mark anyway. What he doesn't know won't hurt him. Reading those words was excruciating. Each sentence was a knife. It wasn't a moment of weakness or a single mistake. It was an orchestrated betrayal, repeated and sustained by the 3 people I trusted most: my wife, my brother, and my own mother. A conspiracy built inside my own family. I felt physically sick, as if something inside me had been violently torn apart. I sat in front of the screen for what felt like hours, my heart pounding erratically, my mind paralyzed by shock. I kept rereading the emails, desperately hoping to find something, anything that would prove it was all a misunderstanding, a sick joke, a nightmare I would wake up from. But it wasn't. It was real. Horribly real. The evidence was overwhelming. Undeniable. Final. The initial wave of despair slowly gave way to something colder resolve. I couldn't let them do this to me. I couldn't let them tear my life apart and walk away unscathed. The engineer in me took over, methodical, logical, focused. I needed to protect myself. I needed proof, tangible, irrefutable. I took screenshots of every email, saved the entire conversation to a USB drive, and printed the most damning ones, the ones that outlined the affair, the pregnancy, the doubt about paternity, and, most painful of all, my mother's role in it. My hands trembled, but my mind was crystal clear. I had a task now, and I would see it through. I needed someone I could trust, someone outside this toxic web. I called Caleb, my boss. My voice cracked as I told him that something terrible had happened and that I needed his advice urgently. He listened patiently. I gave him the basics: Ivy, Mark, my mother, the betrayal, the pregnancy. He didn't downplay it or give me false comfort. His response was firm, immediate, and full of genuine concern. Jason, you need a lawyer now. And don't confront them yet. Not until you've protected yourself. Caleb knew a top-tier divorce attorney, Samantha Gomez, from his own experience. He called her right there from my living room, putting the phone on speaker. Samantha's voice was calm and professional as she listened. Once I laid out the situation, she walked me through my legal position. Since we lived in a state where infidelity carried legal weight in divorce proceedings, and I had solid evidence, I was in a strong position. Most importantly, she pointed out that the house was mine. I had purchased it before the marriage, and the same applied to the bulk of my investments and savings. Her advice was clear and urgent: secure your finances today. Caleb didn't hesitate. He offered to take me to the bank. I sat in the passenger seat, the folder of emails on my lap, still dazed by everything, but immensely grateful for his steady presence. In a moment where everything felt like it was crumbling, Caleb was a lifeline. At the bank, I followed Samantha's instructions. I moved the majority of our joint funds into a personal account in my name. I deliberately left $2,000 in the joint account, enough to show that I wasn't being vindictive, but far from enough to fund a fresh start for Ivy and Mark. The remaining $80,000 went into my separate account. I also contacted my investment firm to ensure that my premarital assets, about $115,000 across various funds, were correctly documented as separate property. It was a cold, calculated process, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos raging inside me. It felt like I was dismantling the structure of my life piece by piece, but at the same time, I was building a fortress. When Ivy walked through the door that evening, I had already set the legal and financial wheels in motion. Samantha was already working on drafting the divorce papers. Caleb had helped me pull myself together at least enough to maintain a facade. The hardest part was acting like everything was normal. "How was your shift?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. "Exhausting," she replied, launching into a detailed story about a supposed crisis in the emergency room, a story I now knew was a complete fabrication. I listened to her lie, thinking of the emails that confirmed she had spent that very day at my mother's house with Mark. It was excruciating. She asked why Caleb's car had been in our driveway earlier. Apparently, the neighbors had noticed there were always eyes watching. I told her we were working on an urgent project, adding another lie to the growing heap. Every untruth I spoke felt like glass in my throat, but I couldn't risk exposing anything yet. I needed more time to lock everything into place and plan my next move. I had to stay strategic. The rage and hurt would have to become fuel, not fire. The following days were unbearable. I was living a double life. I went to work, spoke with colleagues, and acted like everything was fine. Austin continued dropping subtle hints about Mark, hints I now understood completely. Caleb remained a steady, discreet ally. At home, I wore the mask. Ivy and I made small talk, watched our usual Thursday night series. From the outside, we looked like any couple. Inside, I was crumbling. Every affectionate word, every casual touch, every "I love you" from her felt like a blade. I had become a stranger in my own home, a silent witness to a farce. I used every spare moment to tighten my defenses. I gathered essential documents: passport, birth certificate, titles to premarital property, insurance policies, and moved them to a secure deposit box at a different bank. I canceled our joint credit cards, leaving her with only her debit card linked to the nearly drained joint account. Following Caleb and Samantha's advice, I installed small security cameras in the shared areas of the house: the living room, dining room, and entryway. Legally, it was within my rights since the house was solely mine. The technician came while Ivy was at work, and I gave him a vague excuse about neighborhood issues. The cameras brought me a cold sense of control. If anything went wrong during the inevitable confrontation, I'd have evidence. If they tried to destroy things, steal, or manipulate the narrative, I'd be ready. Then Raphael, a friend from the hospital, messaged me. He apologized for not saying anything sooner. He didn't want to interfere if he was wrong. But he told me he had seen Ivy and Mark together a couple of times at a restaurant near the hospital. Their body language, their eye contact, the way they laughed, it was too intimate, too familiar. They didn't look like just in-laws. He thanked me for letting him know I already knew and offered his full support. That outside confirmation, though painful, cemented what I already understood. This wasn't paranoia. I wasn't imagining it. The final nail came on a quiet Sunday night. Ivy was in the shower. Her iPad was on the coffee table. A text notification lit up the screen. It was from Mark. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow at Mom's. I have a surprise for you." There it was. Proof that the affair hadn't stopped. It was alive, active, and unfolding under my roof every day. Rage coursed through me, not fiery and wild, but cold and controlled. I had made my decision. The confrontation would happen soon, and it would happen on my terms. Early Monday morning, I called my father, Ryan. I asked if he and Evelyn could come to dinner at my place that weekend. I told him I had some exciting news to share with the whole family. He sounded surprised. It wasn't like me to host family gatherings, but he agreed without hesitation. "Are you sure you want to host? Your mother and I can do it," he offered. "Yes, I insist, Dad. It has to be here," I replied, fully aware of the symbolism. It had to happen in my house, the one I built with my own hands, the one they had all defiled. I invited Mark too. Then I told Ivy that my parents and Mark would be joining us for a special dinner. The moment I mentioned Mark's name, I saw it. Her shoulders tensed, her expression faltered. She looked uneasy, anxious. The days leading up to the dinner were excruciating. I watched her closely. She was always on her phone, texting. Her face lit up with that familiar smile that once looked sweet to me and now turned my stomach. I knew she was coordinating stories with Evelyn and Mark, trying to guess what good news I was planning to share. That week, I met with Samantha Gomez twice more. We finalized the divorce documents and reviewed the strategy for the confrontation. She reminded me to stay composed, to not let my emotions get the best of me, and under no circumstances to threaten anyone, especially on camera. Yes, I had told her about the cameras. On Thursday, she called to tell me the papers were ready. I picked them up during my lunch break. Carrying that manila envelope in my backpack felt like carrying a live wire. It was heavy with meaning, with consequence. On the day of the dinner Saturday, I took the afternoon off to prepare. I couldn't bring myself to cook, so I ordered from the upscale Italian place downtown, the one Ivy and Mark both liked. A small, deliberate act of irony. I placed the divorce papers inside a plain manila envelope and set it discreetly on the coffee table in the living room where I planned to start the confrontation. The folder with the printed emails, the evidence, went into a larger envelope. That one was for my father. I checked that the dining room camera was on and recording. The final piece of my plan was a gesture of clarity. I cashed in some of my stock options and requested a certified check for $10,000, the exact amount my parents had recently lent Mark to cover yet another round of credit card debt. It was simple. My father, Ryan, was the only truly innocent person in this web. He deserved to have his money back before the storm hit, before the family unraveled, and Mark disappeared again with more debts in his wake. It was both a gesture of respect and a quiet signal that I knew everything. My parents arrived first, around 6:30. Evelyn gave me a stiff, uneasy hug, her eyes scanning the room. "Where's Ivy?" she asked immediately. Her voice was tense. "She's upstairs, finishing getting ready," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. Ryan greeted me with his usual calm hug, curiosity shining in his eyes about the good news. Mark arrived last, around 6:45, walking in with that arrogant smile that made my fists clench. He gave me one of those fake, brotherly hugs, slapping me on the back as if we were still close. I had to summon every ounce of self-control to keep my mask in place. Ivy came down the stairs wearing that blue dress I bought her for our anniversary. She looked nervous, but stunning, an image that only fueled the rage burning inside me. We sat down to dinner. The table was elegantly set, and the aroma of Italian food filled the room, a cruel contrast to the heavy tension hanging over us. I tried to keep the conversation light, work, weather, my father's golf game, but Evelyn kept shooting anxious glances between Ivy and Mark. Ivy barely touched her food, just pushing it around her plate. The silence was thick and uncomfortable. After the main course, Ryan, still unaware of the storm brewing, raised his glass with a warm smile. "Well, son," he said, "what's this good news you wanted to share with us?" In that moment, a strange calm washed over me. I smiled coldly and reached under the table, retrieving the manila envelope with the divorce papers. "Actually, I have something very important to share," I said, sliding the envelope toward Ivy. "These are the divorce papers." The room plunged into heavy silence. Ryan's smile vanished. Ivy's face turned completely pale. What are you saying?" she whispered, not even opening the envelope. Evelyn let out a dramatic gasp. "How dare you, Jason? Accuse her of such a thing? Ivy would never." I cut her off, knowing she would try to distract, deny, and blame me. I pulled out the second envelope, the one holding the evidence, and handed it to my father. "And these, Dad, are emails between Mom and Ivy discussing the affair and how to hide it from me. It's been going on for at least 3 months. Mom has been the main accomplice." Ryan's hands trembled visibly as he took the envelope and began reading the printed emails. The color drained from his face. Mark abruptly stood, knocking over his chair. "You had no right to check her emails," he shouted, trying to deflect, as if that were the real crime. "I think I had every right to know that my wife has been sleeping with my brother and might be pregnant with his child," I said, my voice still surprisingly calm despite the volcanic rage inside me. "How long were you planning to hide this, Ivy? Were you going to pass the baby off as mine?" Ivy burst into tears. "It's not what you think. I love you. It was a mistake, a 3-month mistake with my brother, while my mother covered for me." I laughed bitterly, but there was no humor in it. "And now you're pregnant." Evelyn tried to snatch the papers from Ryan, but he held them just out of her reach. "Evelyn, what is this?" Ryan asked, his voice low and controlled, tinged with danger. "You helped hide this from Jason." Real panic replaced the fake outrage on my mother's face. "Ivy, you told me you were sure it was Jason's," she said, trying to shift the blame onto Ivy to save herself. Ryan looked up from the emails, his face hard as stone. "Evelyn, did you know about this? Did you help hide it from our son?" His voice was barely a whisper, but carried deadly seriousness. Evelyn began crying, playing the victim. "I just wanted to protect the family. Mark made a mistake, but breaking up the family won't help anyone." Then Mark, with his usual arrogance, scoffed. "Come on, it's not that big of a deal. Ivy and I connected, it happens. Jason is always working anyway. He barely pays attention to her." Something inside me finally shattered. The icy calm vanished in an explosion of pure, visceral rage. I stood up, circled the table, and punched him square in the nose. There was a satisfying crunch. Blood immediately poured down his face. He staggered back, knocking over a side table. "Evelyn," she screamed, rushing toward him. "Jason, what is wrong with you?" Ryan stood up, fury etched into his face like I'd never seen before. "Enough, Evelyn. Our son just found out that his wife and brother betrayed him in the worst possible way, and you're worried about Mark's nose?" He pointed at Mark. "Get out of this house. Right now." Mark, clutching his bleeding nose, glared at us all with hatred. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." He spat the words before storming out the front door. Evelyn tried to follow, but Ryan grabbed her arm firmly. "You stay here. We have a lot to discuss about your role in this." Ivy was still crying at the table. "Jason, please, we can fix this. I'm so sorry. It was a terrible mistake." I turned to her, feeling nothing but cold contempt. "I want a paternity test. If you keep this baby, I need to know if it's mine. Either way, we're done. This is over." I took out the certified check for $10,000 and handed it to my father. "This is to pay back what Mark borrowed from you recently, Dad. You deserve to get your money back before this whole thing falls apart." Ryan looked at the check, then at me, his eyes filled with sadness and understanding. "Son, I had no idea any of this was going on. I'm so sorry." Evelyn continued babbling excuses, saying she only wanted to protect Mark, that she knew it was wrong but thought it was just a phase, that she didn't want to hurt me. Ryan didn't want to hear any of it. His voice was stern and final. "Evelyn, get your coat. You're leaving. We have a lot to discuss privately." The atmosphere in the house shifted the moment they left, leaving a heavy void filled with echoes of screams and buried truths. Ivy and I sat in silence in the dining room, the mess of dinner, Mark's overturned chair, the blood on the floor where he had fallen, a stark physical reflection of the wreckage of my life. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke through her tears, her voice trembling. What will happen now? I looked at her, no longer feeling anger, only a cold emptiness and a desperate need to end it all. Now, I said, my voice flat and emotionless, you pack a bag and leave. The house is mine. It's not marital property. You have until tomorrow to figure out where you're going, but it won't be here. She nodded slowly, head bowed. Then she stood and went upstairs to pack. I sat at the dining room table, surrounded by the remnants of what I once thought was my life, feeling an unexpected calm. The worst was behind me. I had faced the betrayal head-on and survived. I knew the path ahead would be long and painful, but I had taken the first step. From now on, it would be about rebuilding. The following weeks passed in a blur of meetings with Samantha Gomez, the lawyer. We filed for divorce, supported by the evidence of the affair. To my surprise, Ivy moved to a friend's house, not with Mark. I changed the locks the day after the dinner. The paternity test was scheduled for the earliest safe opportunity. Ivy agreed without argument, perhaps clinging to the desperate hope that the baby was mine, that it might change something. But for me, it changed nothing. Trust was shattered. Betrayal was undeniable. The next 6 months dragged on in limbo. Divorce proceedings moved slowly. Ivy and I had minimal contact, only through our lawyers. The paternity test was done. We awaited the results. Though, honestly, the outcome no longer mattered. Whether or not the child was biologically mine, it was a product of my wife and brother's betrayal, a constant, painful reminder of my mother's role in it all. I focused on rebuilding my life, returning to work with renewed determination. Caleb remained a steadfast friend and pillar of support. Austin told me Mark had been fired shortly after the dinner. Apparently his behavior and complaints had finally caught up with him, landing him in serious trouble. Details were scarce, but it sounded bad. My father, Ryan, and I had difficult conversations. He was deeply disappointed in Evelyn and Mark. Our relationship grew stronger, bonded by the shared pain of family betrayal. Evelyn tried reaching out a few times, sending messages that swung between self-defense and veiled guilt, but I ignored them. I wasn't ready to forgive or even talk to her. I began to feel a sense of calm returning. My house felt like a refuge again. I accepted the losses. The life I had planned was gone, but I was building a new one, grounded in honesty and self-preservation. I thought the worst was behind me. How wrong I was. A few weeks ago, 6 months after that dinner that shattered everything, I received a call. It was Evelyn. She sounded cautious at first, asking how I was. I replied in monosyllables. Then she got straight to the point. She told me that she and Mark needed to talk to me about the future of the child. Reluctantly, curious and wary, I agreed. We met in a neutral, public place, and there with an audacity I still struggled to process. They laid out their demand. Evelyn, with a serious expression, said that Mark was not capable of properly caring for the child, that I had stability, and it would be best for the little one to be with me. Mark, looking thinner and more shifty than before, added that he was facing serious legal troubles and needed a substantial amount of money to resolve them and start fresh. Their proposal was cynical and cruel beyond words. They wanted me to take full responsibility for the child, raise him, support him, even give him my last name if necessary, and on top of that, pay for Mark's legal expenses. They argued that family is family, and past mistakes should be forgiven for the sake of the child. I felt a surge of disbelief, rage, and a strange sense of validation. This demand was the logical end point of their selfishness, their boundless entitlement, and my mother's belief that I existed solely to fix Mark's problems. They were asking me to accept responsibility for a child born from their betrayal and to bear the cost of my tormentor's mistakes. I looked at my mother and brother, and for the first time, I felt neither pain nor uncontrollable fury. Instead, I was filled with cold, absolute resolve. In a firm, clear voice, I refused their demand. I told them I would never take care of that child. It was their responsibility. I made it clear I would never pay a single cent of Mark's debts. I reminded them they had destroyed our family with their lies, and I would not let them use, manipulate, or ruin my life any further. Then I stood up and walked away, leaving them stunned by my refusal. This demand, the sheer audacity of it, is why I am sharing all of this with you, so you understand the depth of the betrayal and the extent of their cynicism. This is how I process what happened, how I draw a line under it, how I make sure I do not carry this burden alone. The road ahead remains uncertain. The child's future is their responsibility. A year later, the divorce was finally finalized. I was free from the lies, the betrayal, and the toxic ties that had once bound me. Mark, meanwhile, was left to struggle with his own mess, tangled in conflicts with my ex-wife and haunted by the consequences of his choices. I cut all ties with my mother. The only time I ever acted civil toward her was when family functions made my presence unavoidable, and even then, it was nothing more than a polite formality. Through it all, my bond with my father remained unbroken, even strengthened by the shared pain we had endured. In him, I found a steady anchor, a reminder that despite everything, some connections are worth holding on to. I was finally rebuilding not just a life, but a future on my own terms. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.